You're experiencing the Authentic Chaos Podcast, an exploration into our inner selves and journeys of self-discovery. I'm your host, Vahagan Yernosian, and it's been a little bit since I've done a solo episode. I've been a bit busy doing various things, having some reflections. As I mentioned, 2024 is a year of going back to the basics for me, a year of the first principles, trying to really imagine myself and go back to my past and kind of reflect on certain things. And I've also been reading. I've been doing a lot of reading, as I often do. And I recently read The Red Book, which is a series of books and translations of journal entries from Carl Jung. For those who aren't aware, Carl Jung is a prominent, I believe, Swiss psychologist. He was the progenitor of a lot of what we know of as modern psychology today, like the types of introvert, extrovert were concepts that he came up with, and he influenced a lot of how we understand ourselves as a concept. And as he was developing a lot of his psychologies in his late 30s, he started writing these dream journals. And it wasn't just some of them were like dreams that he had while sleeping, but some of them were also these hallucinations that he had while waking. He called these active imaginations. And so I was reading through his journal entries. So this is like reading through very specific dream journals. And then later on, decades later, he analyzed his own dreams and tried to understand the symbology behind what were in his dreams. And this was a very powerful book for me to get through because there are certain kinds of books that you really get to see and hear the author's voice, and not just hear their voice, but get a deep idea of what is in their mind and what they're going through. Words can have a really powerful impact by when they share the right information. They can start to convey the emotions themselves that the person was going through. And luckily, we have Jung did extensive annotations throughout his journal entries. He wrote many letters. He even referred to his journal entries in books and in lectures. So we know a lot of the context behind what he felt. And he was explicit about some of this context. He talked about some of the pains that he went when he started to understand himself. And he saw that these dreams weren't just random events and random one-offs. These dreams were a story being told. It was his own active depth diving into his own self. A lot of the stuff that I talk about on the podcast and a lot of the stuff that I do in my life is based around this diving into myself. It's like an introspection where you're constantly doing it and you're constantly journeying it. And he refers to this as his Odyssey in many times. He refers to it as the Odyssey, and he even likens it to the figure of Jesus Christ when he died and rose again. Because in some of the apocryphal texts he mentions, I believe in the apocryphal texts of St. Paul, it is mentioned that before Jesus rises again into heaven, Jesus spent 3 days in hell so that he could forgive the sinners in hell. And hearing that is really powerful because every one of these stories of enlightenment, of these big journeys, of this attempt to reach the pinnacle, it always starts with a dive into the depths. And just like Jesus and Odysseus, Carl Jung in his dreams dove into hell itself. And a huge portion of him understanding himself involved him going through hell. And hell isn't just this place that in this divine place in space where all sinners go. Hell is personal. Heaven and hell are states of our mind. Hell is when you look at yourself in the mirror and you see those lines that weren't there before. Hell is when you look at your past self and all the things that you thought were important and realize that maybe you were wrong. Hell is the regrets that you get for partaking in the joys that you thought you had. Or hell is when you see that you can't do the things that you used to do. It's that acknowledgement that you have changed, and not in the ways that you wanted, because we always change in ways that we don't want. We always have things that we will shame ourselves of. Hell is that first look on yourself, that first sincere look on the quest to really loving yourself. And I've mentioned this many times. People will tell you to love yourself, but they don't mention the difficulty that is involved in loving yourself, because we know ourselves so deeply. We know our own demons. And that is the confrontation with hell. And if that sounds terrifying, if that sounds like something you don't want to do, I totally understand, right? I get it. I felt like that too. But at times, you don't intentionally go into hell. At times, hell engulfs you. And I want to give some like personal examples from my own life, maybe as a way to connect, or a way to be vulnerable, right? So I can think of two very, very strong memories, that's what the name is, memories of my own descent into hell. Both of them kind of being very kind of unintentional. I kind of had no say in it. In college, first one was in college. My sophomore year, I was starting to get very depressed. I was spending a lot of time doing studies and focusing on my schooling, because that's what I was best at. But in doing so, I left a lot of my social self to kind of wither. And I told myself that it was fine. But I felt so lonely as I saw all of my friends around me, all of my dorm mates start to date people and get into relationships. And there was a time where I was like one of very few people left in my friend group that wasn't in a relationship. And it felt so lonely. And I remembered a few times where some of the women that I liked, and maybe I came on, and times I came on too strong, or I was trying to be too passive, or I got too aggressive, or I fumbled around, or I was socially awkward. Various things happened, and I just got frustrated, and that frustration turned into depression, and turned into thoughts where you don't want to go. Saying I would look at myself in the mirror and just fill with anger, and kind of hate myself for what I thought was a deficiency in me. And I would often ask myself, what is wrong with me? Why can't I be normal? Will I never love? And I struggled with those fears and those feelings all throughout the rest of college. And I guess I just kind of pushed it aside. But these things kept haunting me. It was like these demons clawing at me. And I didn't want to go through this. I didn't want to face myself like this. And my first real encounter with myself was terrifying. Then a couple years later was my second encounter with hell, arguably. Well, there were probably more, but this is one it was a big moment of my life. So I was in a PhD program for chemical engineering, and I spent a lot of time on my studies. I loved just researching. I loved being around, the people that I was around. I had good friends. I was still not dating and still like felt kind of lonely, but a lot of that had subsided because I had spent my life. I was spending my time, spending my energy focused on my research because I loved the work. I loved science. This seemed like an important thing for me to do. But toward the end of my, for those who don't know, I ended my PhD early, or well, rather, I left early, and it ended ended against my will ultimately, because when it came down to, there's an exam that you have to take, and it's less of an exam and more like a practice dissertation where you present a first version of what will be your PhD research to your committee, who would be the people sitting on your PhD board and who will ultimately give the yay or nay for if you get to determine if you get the degree. And I was, I had put a lot of work, a lot of time into my work. I had designed this whole project with the collaboration between my two advisors, and I was really proud of it because this represented some of my maybe imagination, or my ambition. And I gave the presentation, and admittedly, like, my results were pretty preliminary, and I didn't have as much hard data as I wanted, but I figured I was going to be collecting more data over the summer, and it could have, it would have been fine. It just was an unfortunate timing situation. And at the end of the presentation, you give the presentation, takes half an hour, and then, there's an hour of questioning. And so I give the presentation, and then the questions start to come in. And as they're coming in, I start to feel this sinking sensation because they're starting to really interrogate and really drill down. And what really hurt was that one of my advisors really started to ask me very kind of mean questions, and basically being like, "Oh, did you waste your time? What is this? This is juvenile. This is foolish. This is not working out." And I just felt my heart sink because my world shattered in that moment. I had a whole life for me kind of figured out. I had a vision, a dream of how I wanted my life to be, and I was so proud of myself for doing what I was going to do to get there, and it was going to be this ultimate culmination of all that I had sacrificed and the encounter with my hell. But what I hoped was the ascent into heaven ended up being just more depths of hell as I exited the room, and they deliberated, and the deliberation wasn't long. It did not take long, but it did feel like forever, and I just felt myself falling apart. And as my dream fell apart, and then they told me that they are going to would recommend me to not continue with the PhD program, and to transition to the master's and try to graduate as soon as I can. And so in that moment, in this like ultimately 2 hour period, my whole life changed, and I was like, oh, I guess I need to figure out what I'm doing with the rest of my life now, and where I'm going to live, and what my community is going to be, and who am I? And I just cried, and it was that the rest of that, the next 3 months were very difficult. The next 6 months were very difficult, even because I really I tuned myself out. I did not want to. I stopped caring for my body. I let myself fall into I've let my health falter. I just tried everything I could to run away. And I did ultimately run away, and I even blocked a lot of the memories that I had made in my time there, and a lot of the friendships I had, because the feelings were so painful. Because the journey into hell is not an easy one, but it's a necessary one. Because sometimes hell isn't a personal choice. Sometimes hell just comes to us. And this hell was an important part of my life, and is an important part of my life. It was an important turning point in my life. And to say that it wasn't would be a lie. And this is a big thing of my whole 2024 is the year of the basics, the year of going back to the past and saying it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to be sad, right? It's okay to look back and feel the way you feel about the past. But in order for you to really start to love yourself and be able to love yourself and to reach your heights, you have to go into your depths. And that was something that was so vivid with Carl Jung in his own imaginations. And when he did go into his past, he was scared, and he felt awful, and he felt drained and upset and real. He felt like all these very real things. And just reading this book, I just saw myself in his own journey. And then he made a tie to the other stories, right? The Odyssey, story of Christ. Even he talked about the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, or Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra, as these stories of almost like a coming of age, but it's like a coming to self, where you find your truth. You start to understand the truth of our reality, that we are way more complex than we think we are. I heard it said that we don't even understand the multitudes that we are. The concept of even a self is in itself just a concept, and probably just an oversimplification for us to even out all of the complexities and of all of our multitudes. Because we're more than just ourselves. We're the stories of our parents and their parents and the people that came before, and we're the stories of our burgeoning species, and all these, so much gets encoded in us. We are the story of our culture. We are swept in with the unconscious tide of the collective, and that is a part of us too. And we have to be real with that as well. And we aren't who we were in the past, and we aren't who we will be in the future, but we are who we are right now. And that descent into hell, when you make that descent into hell, you no longer fear hell. Once you make your hell, your depths, like a common place for you to go to, it takes the fear away from it. It is all about how we see it, how our perspective of our own depths. Even calling it hell is admittedly makes it sound scary. But when you stop seeing it as scary and more as this is you, you wouldn't have your heights, your highest moments without your lowest moments. You wouldn't have your good without your evil. You wouldn't have your beautiful without the ugly. And this was such a beautiful point that Jung was making within this story, that like these complex stories of self, between the story of Christ, the story of Odysseus, the story of Dante, they're all about these like complexities and contradictions. And these contradictions coexist in a beautiful way because we coexist with our contradictions in a beautiful way. Our contradictions, our complexities are what make us us. And this has been a really nice like revisiting of like a faith-based perspective of ourselves, not from the perspective of spirituality, but looking at these allegories of faith as ultimately an attempt to understand ourselves. And so through my own depths within myself, I kind of understood that who I am now came through that journey. I can't say if it was for the best or not, but I am here because of the moments that I had in the past. And for that, they must be respected in a way. But I can also look back and learn the lessons. It was through these moments that I learned that. It was through my moments in college and my reflections therein now that I've realized that this loss, heartbreak aren't really terrible emotions. They are feelings that we have, but they don't have to be so terrible. And if you find that love within yourself, that foundation within yourself, turn that gaze of love inward, that affection to you, then you don't need anybody else's love. You are the fountain of your own love. And that has been a really powerful lesson for me in my current life. And I feel like has set me up for just loving myself and loving others. And then from my hell adventure in grad school, moments like that and my subsequent layoff, it made my layoff a lot less painful, as I've mentioned several times on this podcast. But it also revealed to me that I was stuck in this identity that wasn't me. I was pushing myself to be something I wasn't, and ultimately I was filling my identity with things that were on the outside, my hobbies and habits, my dreams, my occupation. These things aren't what I am, and they don't deserve to be a defining feature of what I am. For I contain multitudes. I contain complexities. I contain feelings and voices that some of which may not even be mine. But we work together to create the essence of Vahagan Yarnosian. And so as I wrap up here, I want to emphasize the words, not just my words, but the words of Carl Jung and the words of the ancients before him, because he helped tie in me the idea that this isn't a new concept, this diving into our depths to reach our heights and our greater enlightenment, and this idea that our self is this series of contradictions. Because look at look at how the evolution of religion. The evolution of religion is all about these. You see these deities forming that are all these different facets of life. And then suddenly maybe we go to fewer divinities, but they go into even more complicated aspects of life. Like things about the feelings in our heads. Like, where does greed or lust come from? Why do we feel kindness? Why do we feel elation? These things we try to define by something else. But is it really an extra planar being, a spiritual being, a spirit world that we can't ever see or interact with? Or is this a reflection of our inner battles on the outside? And when we look at that, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is like, deities, and maybe they're all real. It could be, I don't know. But I challenge you, even you believers, to consider the hell and the heaven within you, and how in order to reach your heaven, you must first reach your hell. In order for you to have your greatest good, you must accept your darkest evil. For you to have your most beautiful moments, you must love your ugliest moments. For it is this is what is involved in working with your shadow and dealing with your shadow. And if you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend checking out the Red Book. It is a phenomenal read. There was a moment that I want to end with, this moment that really brought me to tears. And I'm talking like crying ugly. I was bawling tears. It was at the very end of the book where Jung had completed his journey into hell and found his soul, and his soul rose to heaven with his greatest good. And he was left with the shell of his self. And he just berates his self and calls it selfish and ugly and pathetic, and torments this poor concept of his self. And I just broke down into tears because I did that same thing, like that. I did that too. And I think that's the hard part. When you look at yourself in the mirror, when you first do it, your first reaction can easily be to tear yourself apart, because you're not meeting those standards that you had, because you aren't as good as you were before, because various reasons, right? But we have to give ourselves the grace of being human, right? And part of my journey has been just going back to, and part of my reflections this month has been just going back to my prior self and just giving myself a hug and saying, it's okay. It's okay to feel this pain, okay? We're not the only ones that feel this pain. I'm not going to say it gets better, because in those moments it doesn't really matter, but what matters is that this pain is natural. This pain is okay. This pain is not meant to hurt you. This pain is your journey of love. And keep going. Keep going. Keep going, because it's worth it. It really is. It really is. And when I sign off on this podcast, as I normally do, and I ask you to embrace your chaos with kindness, this is what I mean. When you look at yourself in the mirror, be kind. When you reflect on the things that, the flaws in you, be kind. When you look at your past and you want to feel sad or like scorn yourself for the decisions you made in the past, be kind. We all deserve that kindness, because none of us really understand what's going on in this life. Most of us don't understand what's going on in our heads. It's okay to feel because we contain multitudes. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. And as always, embrace your chaos with kindness.